Hey everybody, welcome to the Leader to Leader podcast, brought to you by the StarQuest Group. I'm your host, Tom Athenour, and today I'm thrilled to introduce you to someone I've had the privilege of working with over the last 14 years, Jess Kindler. Jess's career journey has been impressive to watch. He's moved from a GM role to a senior executive position, leading a division within a major global company. What's always stood out to me is his ability to balance both the strategic visioning side and the execution while never losing sight of the people that he leads. In a world where results often overshadow relationships, Jess exemplifies a leadership style that delivers both. In our conversation, Jess shares his story, the lessons he's learned along the way, and what he believes leaders should be focusing on as we look to the next 5 years. So let's dive in and hear from my good friend, Jess Kindler.
I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I like to tell people I'm a Western U.S. guy, and I'm a mining guy. I spent the bulk of my career in mining, around mining equipment, drilling equipment, and chasing these machines all over the planet. So I've worked in 56 countries. I'm a mining engineer by education, but I've mainly focused on the business side of mining. And I have a big family, so that takes up a lot of my time when I'm not working on the business. And I've worked for several global multinational companies, both public and private now. So long time in this industry, and sitting in Atlanta, Georgia these days, where the weather is nice and the trees are green most of the year. So.
Well, we've been working together for, as I said, a number of years, and you most recently were with a company named Brand Safeway out of Atlanta. That's the reason why you're in Atlanta, right?
Right.
And they're large. If you could just share a few of your latest positions, kind of your roles,
Sure.
within company, would be great.
Sure. I guess maybe I'll start just when you and I met. I think I was running a business out of Elko, Nevada, and so it was a mining business. We were supplying Barrick and Newmont and Rio Tinto, some of the really big multinational mining houses. And I think that's where I really learned a lot about key account management or key customer management, strategic engagement, that sort of things. I moved on from that. I went back to school and got an MBA at Wharton West out in San Francisco. And I chose San Francisco and Wharton in particular because you want, when you do that MBA, I think it's important that first you have some years of experience behind you, but second off, that you pick a cohort of students that are nothing like yourself, so that you really get the most out of the network and the most out of your cohort. And when I finished up that, I ended up going overseas to Indonesia, and I was the general manager and president director of our Atlas Copco mining subsidiary in Indonesia, based out of Jakarta. It was the first time for me and my family to be really immersed in a foreign culture. We all learned the language. I got fluent enough on the language to be able to speak on television, actually, with one of the ministers, the Minister of Pekerjaan Umum and Infrastructure. So that was great. I learned a lot about culture and the different ways of business being done in Asia. Learned a lot about China and how that China manufacturing miracle happened, and then how there's a difference between China for China and China for outside of China. And spent a number of years there in Southeast Asia, really working with teams, building up local teams that were capable of world-class results. And eventually, towards the end, I got asked to move to Sweden and become a executive for the group. And so I became president for the first time of a division called Mining and Rock Excavation Service for Atlas Copco. It was a division responsible for all the parts and service in the aftermarket for the mining equipment. It was a relatively young division. I was the third president of that division, and the division was only 5 years old. And so each one of the three presidents, myself included, had a different mission. And my mission was really to grow that business both top line and bottom line. So I wasn't a cost cutter, but I wasn't somebody with an unlimited checkbook either. But what we did there was really look at how do we make service easier to sell in a way to get that top line going faster. And so what we did was really created products out of our services. And so where before we were probably like when you and I first met, we were probably selling service by the hour.
Yes.
And it was always a challenge to keep all of your technicians and mechanics occupied. And so we started selling packages and products like excuse me, midlife rebuild or rock drill exchange. And there we could do more with fixed pricing and make it easier for the salespeople to sell a product and still grow that services business. So that was I would say that was the main key to success. Some other things that we did, we got really scientific about pricing, and then we were able to do much more and be much more precise with our pricing and make it a powerful lever for the group. And then a couple years into that assignment, I went through a transformation where we took the mining business from Atlas Copco and spun it out and did an IPO of a brand new company. And that was called Epiroc. And so I had never done an IPO before. And so that was quite interesting, setting up the strategy. We took a 140-year-old company and then set it free, and it almost became like a startup, but a 140-year-old startup. So we got a new board that was focused on mining. We got kind of a new breath of life and a new impetus for growth. And wow, now we're by ourselves. So, the result became even more important. And so we learned a lot from that. I learned a lot about inorganic growth. With a mining focused board, we were able to make more acquisitions in the mining space. So did a lot with the energy transformation from diesel engines over to battery powered equipment, did a lot with automation. And then my favorite business is rock drills, and we were able to buy several rock drill companies. At the same time we did all that with the division, we were also starting in new markets and growing teams and building infrastructure in new markets. We enhanced our business in Brazil. We built a new business in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And really, we were advancing, our system way of thinking, across the globe in these new places and really teaching new teams how to do the Atlas Copco way and then the Epiroc way after that. Finally, my time in Sweden and time with Epiroc, Atlas Copco, Ingersoll Rand ended, and I decided to come back to the U.S. And what I did, I joined a portfolio company, like you mentioned, Brand Safeway, owned by two private equity companies. One is Brookfield out of Canada, and the other was Clayton, Dubilier and Rice, based out of New York. So my first experience in private equity, I started again as a division president. I finished as a president and the chief growth officer. And yeah, learned a lot about the way private equity views the world, learned how to exist and thrive under, leveraged financing. And also, how do you grow where, CapEx is not unrestricted, CapEx is restricted, and it's not just a free-for-all for growth. So where do you really pick and target markets where that growth is possible, and then put the right people in the place that are going to let you grow that market. Finally, yeah, the last few months I've been standing up a consulting company, and so in January we started looking to how we would form this, and then April I left Brand Safeway, and yeah, for the last month I've been working to recruit consultants and sign up clients and kick off projects, and it's been a really exciting time around here. And we're trying to figure out, like, okay, do we have a contract for that, and who has the contact with the lawyer, and who has the contact with this consultant, and getting all these things going, and at the same time buying some plane tickets and flying to exciting places and trying to deliver for our customers. But I'm really excited about the next part of my journey, and this company is called Hutan Hujan LLC. That means rainforest in the Indonesian language. And my wife and I put this company together. And yeah, we see some real legs to it. And I think it's all about being a growing partner for our clients and really taking this network of 21 years, 25 years, and really introducing new clients to that network and really enhancing their results or giving them, some more tools in their toolbox or support in their support cabinet to allow them to achieve what they're trying to achieve. And again, a lot around growth, product management, pricing, all these kind of themes that we had done for so many years. So.
Yeah, one of the things that, I know that you're working a lot in expanding, helping companies move into new markets, new geographies, go international, go global, come back to the US a little bit. What are you seeing out there? Because I think context and landscape of how companies are navigating out there, particularly in the global space, what do you see as some of the macro trends that are happening out there that's affecting business?
So there's been a few of them, and I mentioned a few of them already. I think that energy transformation from, gas and diesel over to electric is huge, and that's driving a big shift for a lot of the old industrial companies. Also, the mining companies. Of course, when you go for all this electric gear, there's a demand for minerals that's maybe twice as great as it was 10 years ago, and it's probably going to double again in the next 10 years. So you're looking at demand for copper and lead, zinc, silver, lithium, that didn't exist at this demand level before. Add to that China decoupling, for instance. So China and obviously several other countries are looking at more of a nationalistic stance, but this China decoupling was a huge shift in the market and really understanding like, you know, how much business was being affected by China manufacturing, and now that it's being holistically manufactured in China versus parts and pieces coming in from the outside, that's a different way of looking at things, and it was something that required leaders and businesses to shift. Then we add in big supply chain shocks like COVID and global pandemic and shipping went haywire and logistics channels that were, for 50 years were could be relied on couldn't be relied on anymore, and huge supply chain shock. And then we had wars at the end of that, and we still see wars starting even last week with some hot action between India and Pakistan. So there's a lot of things that maybe, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we were seeing them every 5 to 10 years. Now we're just seeing them like every 2 years, I would say, is the way it feels like to me. And at the same time, technology is going even faster and faster and faster. And, AI is overtaking the electrification now. So 2 years ago, I would have told you energy transformation was the most important mega trend that's happening. Now I got to tell you that AI and the shift on using AI in your business and using AI to drive cost out of your business and results up, it's like nothing I've ever seen. So I think the only easy and slow day was yesterday, Tom. I think it only gets faster and more complicated from here.
Boy, isn't that the truth? Yeah. And even you've talked a lot about from a global perspective, but even domestically here in the US, North America, a lot of stuff going on here as far as some of those trends and shifts.
Well, absolutely. And I had been gone for so long that I had to kind of repatriate myself and understand what's going on in this market. And I think there's huge industry shifts happening and mega projects. The LNG export terminals on the Gulf Coast. I mean, these are massive projects. Each one of them are, 20, $30 billion up to $100 billion. And you have 150 tower cranes on site, and you have 5,000 guys working on the site to build out these LNG export terminals. You have the semiconductor fabrication plants like Intel in Scottsdale and TSMC in Sedona. These are massive decades long fabrication plants and projects that are happening. And then the data centers that are being delivered now in response to the demand for more AI. I mean, it's fantastic to see how fast these things are getting built and put in, but at the same time, they're stressing the electricity grid. So then we're seeing a resurgence in coal-fired power. So all that's happening in the U.S., and that's I think what's underpinning a lot of the demand and the growth in jobs in the U.S.
How much? I'm curious around the. We talk a lot about VUCA and Bonnie and uncertainty and all that. I understand that these changes and macro shifts are creating that sense of uncertainty. From a leadership perspective, how do you see leaders responding to that? Is it really kind of being more externally focused rather than internally focused, or because there's two ways to look at some of these things that are going on out there, right?
Like and I got this from our friend Nelson, but I like to think of things as customer centric as being the best way for leaders to focus around these changes. So I think it's not enough anymore to think, okay, I'm Walmart and this is my business model and I'm always going to have this business model. I'm going to operate it and I can drop any person into the Walmart model and they can, spit out the results that we're looking for. It's not the case anymore. And here you got to look at your customers and what your customer is going through and really design your business model around what your customer is asking you for. And so that's what I say customer centricity is. And, you know, not necessarily just external view, internal view. It's about what does the customer want and how does the customer respond to this problem? We had a customer in Mongolia, and during this COVID and then later the war, there was issues with borders shutting down. Mongolia is landlocked, Tom, so you can't export unless you go through China or Russia. And
Yeah.
and so if the borders close, there's no export, and at the same time, there's no import. And when the war kicked off, there was no explosives able to get into Mongolia. So the
Yeah.
customer is asking for things that you never thought of as a leader before, and the system doesn't work. The way you had everything set up for the supply chain just didn't work, and you
Yeah.
have to be able to respond to that and refigure, retool, the way your organization is going to deliver against that.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of examples that I've seen, and yeah, I think there's just going to be more of it coming, and more expectation from the customers that, hey, this is the way you dealt with me for 20 years, but it doesn't work anymore. So you have to reconfigure. And if you don't reconfigure, I'm going to find a small guy and invest in his business and give my business to him because he's able to be agile and he's able to respond to the way I want.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had conversations along the lines of I'm hearing a bit of a shift in more of the people side of it, even more so than what you've always held to be true in how you think about leadership. But, we've talked about the vision, mission, strategy drives structure. And you asked me the question, does structure drive people or do people drive structure or whatever it is? And we had this conversation. I think your view has shifted a little bit on that structure used to be upstream from the people side of it. I'm not hearing that from you as much as today than maybe a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I just don't think it's going to serve our purpose anymore. And of course, I was, 20 years with a group that had fantastic results and fantastic structure and, a way of doing things. They even had this big, online book inside of our, remember Lotus Notes? We had a huge Lotus Notes database called The Way We Do Things. And it was the way we do things at Atlas Copco. And it was all about structure and all about, this is the way it's done around here. And it just doesn't serve the purpose because back then, okay, you could drop new people and drop anybody into this structure, and they were able to function and deliver against the results. But when you throw all these externalities and shocks into the system, then I think that's really structure doesn't serve as much as putting a person in there that a person that has that kind of competence, confidence, courageous. You and I always talk about courageous authenticity, right? But I think about it, and being courageous in one of these big companies means you're tasked with some new way of thinking, some new way of doing things, and you got to convince 59 other departments and people that your new way of doing things is right, and their old way of 144 years is wrong. And that takes courage. I got to tell you, when you sit in a meeting and have to defend your project against that takes courage.
Yeah, which is really about the whole change and agility and being able to respond and make pivots quicker. Hearing from you that's got to be a core competency of leadership going forward. It's almost a non-negotiable.
I think it is non-negotiable, Tom. I think the time has passed now where people can expect the day in day out is not changing. Day in day out is changing, and it's changing fast. And if we're not able to adjust and adjust meaning change the process, It could be that this standard operating procedure served you well for a lot of situations, and now it just doesn't work. So you have to have the courage to rewrite that standard operating procedure and make it work for the customer today.
Yeah. So, everybody's talking about transformational leadership and being a change agent and all of that. A lot of our listeners are out there from a variety of different companies, some small, some mid, some larger. But really, if they're logging in and listening in on this podcast, they're most likely interested in how do I become better at what I'm trying to accomplish. If you were to share some thoughts around what are the most important things that leaders really need to be zeroed in on from a change perspective, not only for themselves, but also how they lead their teams and others, because that's going to be a core competency. I'd say it's in the top three, going forward.
Absolutely. So I think some of my advice from the past still serves, which is when you see the hard projects coming, volunteer for them. Whether it's a technology shift, whether it was this energy transformation that happened and companies setting up, small little subsidiaries to take care of batteries now versus engines, or a new market. I think it's important for younger leaders, wanting to make a difference and then wanting to, let's say, earn their stripes, is really sticking their hand up and saying, hey, I hear it's an e-commerce project. It's something we've never done. I'd like to volunteer for it. Hey, I heard about this AI agent, that we're going to put into our customer service or inside sales group. I'd like to volunteer for it. Hey, it's CRM and commercial intensity. I want to volunteer for it. So I think that's the biggest advice I can give to any leader is be curious. And to me, curiosity, the natural consequence to your curiosity is, hey, now you want to be part of it. So you're curious about what that change is. Here they tell you this is what we're looking for, and you stick your hand up and say, hey, I'm in, and I'm committing, and I'm going to go after it and deliver it. I'm going to deliver against the hard projects.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I agree with you. And I would also say that some of those culture, the culture eats strategy for lunch. I mean, I truly believe that after 30 some years in this business. How do leaders really keep the courage and keep the momentum to keep going, given some of the cultural constraints or the headwinds against what some of those change initiatives are really trying to accomplish? I mean,
I think if you're a change,
how do I hold course, despite the fact that there's more resistance out there than maybe what I hold to be true about myself and how I want to move forward?
I think you got to be a storyteller. So I would encourage, that middle tier of leaders to really get good at telling stories, because your story is important up the chain and down the chain. So when you are tasked with a change project, typically it has board observation. So the board is watching that project. They've been briefed on it. They've approved the investment in it. So their eyes are on it. So if you get called up and have to brief the board on project status or how's it going, get good at telling that story. Be emotional, be invested, share with all of them how hard it is to change the momentum of these big companies. At the same time, you need to be able to take a story and bring it down to your people and tell them a story on why it is that they need to change, why they're being asked to do things in a different way. And again, explaining it with analogies and stories, I think that just makes it so much more effective, and it sticks in people's minds. I think if you just sit there and grind away the PowerPoint slides, they're going to forget, more than half of it. But if you can tell a story and really kind of point it out and say, hey, this is what I was wearing and this is what the guy said. Can you believe this is what the guy said? Anyway, you kind of paint, the characters in the story and share with them how they reacted and what the consequences were. I think if you have that skill set, it's going to serve you well in this time of change and uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything in particular, because we were talking about this last week in some prep discussion that we had around helping people, because management leadership, I think, is a contact sport in many ways. I mean, clearly it's a strategic approach to leadership, and you've got more organizational and team, but also it's an individual. But it is a contact sport. And you were talking last week around really meeting people where they are relative to their level of ability to connect and lean into change. Talk to our listeners about what it is that you've done to kind of address some of the resistance or or the hesitations around getting people to kind of get on board?
I think you hit on a few of them. I think one of them is where the people are at. I mean, everybody goes through tough times and stressful times, but it's like, at least for me, it's when I build a team, I want people that share that vision of the future with me. And so are they able to see what I see as far as possibilities, as far as, resistance or obstacles that we're going to have to overcome? Are they able to see that with me and visualize it? Some people just aren't going to like visualize it and just can't. You and I talked a little bit even about the physiology about it, and sometimes people, faced with change, they feel internal pain, like physical pain, and they just cannot change. And at the other stage, it's like it's about exposure and clarity and competence. And has that person been exposed to this kind of mission before? Do they have the competence? Have we put them in the right training scenario? Have we given them a chance to fail and learn from it? So I think that competence and clarity is a big piece. I think understanding where this person is, on reason why, are they able to answer a reason enough for themselves to get on board and move forward, or are they just like, uh, Gene Matala at Atlas Copco? He told me one time. He said, a goldfish can't climb a ladder. Goldfish just have like little fins on the front, and you're asking this goldfish to climb a ladder. He just can't climb it. He's just not that kind of person. He's just not that kind of animal that climbs ladders. So you got to take that goldfish and put him in a pond where he's able to be pretty and swim around. That's what a goldfish does. So I think sometimes when you look at your organization, you got to say, hey, is this person unsuccessful because I'm trying to ask him to climb a ladder and he's a goldfish? So I need to shift him to where he can make that really good impact versus expecting him to make something that he can't.
Yeah. So it goes back to the start with why, which we can, give credit to Simon on that, Simon Sinek, but
Yeah.
really kind of being clear on what the picture kind of going forward, the narrative around that, the stories, both kind of sort of around, but also really kind of meeting people where they are and helping them kind of break it down. I mean, you gave the example of some people will see that as such an impediment where it's a huge chasm that needs to be crossed. And yet, if you just sat down with people and have a conversation and have empathy, you can help break down and get it down to some smaller steps for them to keep moving forward. It may not be the way you move, but it will be a movement forward. And that's really critical as being one of the things you look for.
I think if you can add one thing to that, Tom, if you can add the customer and the customer's perspective in that, it makes it even more of a powerful story. So if you can explain how this vision of the future, what does the customer see in that picture? What does the customer feel? What is the customer's feedback to you going to be? So sometimes, we have teams that don't have as much customer facing time as we would like. And there you got to convince this person of what that customer is feeling and what that customer's consequence of our way of doing business is. So I think if you add that little bit onto your story, even makes it 10
Kind of
times
the
more
external
powerful.
benchmarking. Yeah. As opposed to just internally focus. Yeah. So if you were giving your 20-year-old self going back a ways, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
That's a great question. So I think back to my 20-year-old self, and we had just gotten cell phones and email back then. And so you think about it, it's like, hey, you better be prepared for even more technology shifts, right? I mean, those were huge deals, right? Right when the BlackBerry came out, that was huge. And look at what the iPhones and the Samsungs can do now. It's fantastic. So I would have told my 20-year-old self, take even more technology classes, courses, exposure. Get involved with robot. Like I remember this at School of Mines. One of my roommates was a robotics major, and he was from North Dakota. He was a wrestler from North Dakota, but he was quite involved in this robotics. And man, now looking at all the robotics we're doing today, it's like yeah, it would have been good to have even more experience back then in my 20-year-old self. So the other thing I would tell the 20-year-old self is, content like travel, learn languages. You know, I think learning languages and traveling makes you such a more well-rounded citizen or business person in the world, right? I think the American way of doing things, the GE way of doing things, I mean, that dominated forever, right? But you go overseas and there is other ways to do it and they're quite successful at it and sometimes even better than the American companies. So I think I would definitely tell that 20-year-old self, keep the passport valid, you know, use your frequent flyer miles whenever you can to go, see something new and learn something new.
Yeah. What
I,
have you
I think
found?
as Americans, I think the best thing I learned when Atlas Copco bought us was that importance of language. Our first GM, he spoke six languages, and so six languages is a tall order. But I think if Americans can speak, at least two or three, I think it's fantastic, and it just opens your world to so many more possibilities.
Is it a way to get perspective and think broader? Is that what really, in addition to being able to connect with different parts of the world, clearly it's a communication objective, but it's also I'm hearing more of a bigger picture that the world's bigger than just maybe what your domain is as a leader.
I think it's about choices and about possibilities. If I just look at the U.S. political system, and I'm not going to say I like one or the other, but there's only two choices, right? You go to some of these other countries and there's eight, 10, so why in the U.S. do we saddle ourselves with just, blue or red? That's all we got. You
Yeah.
go to these other countries and you got purple and orange and, cows with white faces and everything else. So, I think possibilities is one. I just think it makes your mind broader to be able to, think or dream in a different language. But at the same time, you touch on the communications piece. If you're going to operate in some of these countries, especially in Asia, I think people don't like telling you problems in English. If they're going to tell you problems, they're going to tell you problems in their language, right? And still, they're not going to feel comfortable about telling you, but at least there's a chance they're going to tell you in the local language. If you're expecting them to tell you problems in English, I mean, forget it. They're already nervous enough speaking, trying to speak English correctly, and they're focused on that versus telling you what's really important. So I think that we can't underestimate that communications piece of reaching somebody on their level at their language.
Yeah. So your 20-year-old self just learned that you got to stay up on the technology, and even though the whole AI front is moving fast, use AI to plan your next vacation, whatever it is, to try to get more comfortable with that utilization of that technology. Keep your passport current. Is there a third thing you'd tell your 20-year-old self?
Stay curious, right? Stay curious. Just because you love something like mining, like for me, like okay, I love mining, doesn't mean that there aren't other whys out there. My why of loving mining is about building wealth for countries and seeing people get out of poverty. But there's other industries like let's take waste management. I mean, there's another opportunity again to help society in a bigger way. And I think that 20-year-old self growing up in Albuquerque, going up to School of Mines, I mean, that's still a pretty restricted, view of humanity. And you
Yeah.
go to some of these other countries and you really see what poverty is. And conversely, you really see what extreme wealth is. But, if all you see is New Mexico and Colorado, that's a pretty narrow corridor for your worldview. So yeah, I would say looking outside your comfort zone for your whys, being open to those possibilities is also good.
Yeah. Particularly right now with a lot of the work that we're doing is around polarity management and really recognizing two opposites that may be on the, as looking for, is there an integration? It opens up your perspective to explore other options that may be, there might be two options that are viable, you know, and being
And
curious about understanding different points of view. So,
I also think you can see like one industry solves the problem differently than this industry. So
yes.
I see technologies then that can be moved, from one industry over to another, like friction stir welding. Apple uses it in their laptops. Airbus uses it on manufacturing airplanes. I mean, those are two completely different products and markets, but the technology, can be shared across. But if you're not open to that, you're never going to run into that solution.
Yeah. So I just have a few more questions, and then we can kind of wrap this up, Jess. But what if you were to turn around and grab a business book off your shelf? Which one would you give to somebody that's really sort of just emerging, kind of taking on more leadership roles? Is there anyone
You
in
know,
particular?
you asked me this during the prep, so I did more prep this time, and I put a few of them behind me
I
now.
thought you had a few more books back there. You got
Yeah.
the
So
goatee
I
going
pulled
with
them off
books.
the top shelf and brought them down. I said, okay, I really like this one. So, I like stuff with titles like No Excuses Leadership. Okay. So there's this book written by these guys that I went to Ranger School, and everybody's got their Ranger School stories, but it's always about like
Okay, so you went to range. So are you a Army Ranger? Did I hear that right?
I just went to Ranger School, so I was in an airborne group, and I was a combat engineer attached to that airborne group. But I did
Okay,
graduate from Ranger School, and you go there, and it's the Army's premier school on leadership. So everybody has tons of these stories, but at the end of the day, the instructors there, you have to pass a certain number of leadership opportunities, and they always start off with there's no excuses. So start off with what you plan to do, what actually happened, and what you learned from it. But there's no excuses, no room for excuses in that leadership. So it's about taking accountability. So then that takes me to my next book that I really like. And one of your other guests, John Torpy, he likes this book as well, but it's called Extreme Ownership. And again, when you have extreme ownership, it means that you can rely on your teammates in this high performing team because they all own their part of the mission, and you can always rely on them to deliver against what they're supposed to do. But there's some other ones there. Leading Out Loud, I like that one. The Impact of Love. You and I talked about a little bit that in the prep session. I think
yeah,
love is a huge concept in business. I think if you love what you do, you're going to love your organization, and you're going to love the people that are delivering it. You're going to love your customers, and I think that provides some fuel to really get to that high performance level. If you don't love what you're doing or love the business that you're in, I think you're kind of just going through the motions, and you're going to deliver, an average result. So I like that. Good to Great. I think that's a classic. I've talked about that. I put Lencioni there, dysfunctions of the team. I think those are critical learning things. You and I, we've seen so many teams now. I think we could write our own book on dysfunctions of a team, and maybe we could find even a sixth or
a few
seventh one
more,
there. But
a couple
yeah,
more.
exactly. But
Yeah.
those are the kind of business books I like. The one I'm reading today, it's called Flawless Consulting, and so that's the new one that is going in my backpack for the trip to Tokyo. Because of course we're doing this Tokyo run on our kickoff for our consulting business. Two other ones, I like this Getting to Yes, the Harvard Guide on Negotiations.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
there was kind of a follow-up called The Power of a Positive No, which is also about getting to yes, but it's framing it with no's on either side and building a bridge to that yes. And I read that book twice actually in the last 6 months, and it
yeah.
served me well. So anyway, that's what's on my shelf, and that's what's gone through my backpack, and that's what I recommend.
That's great. I have another question for you before we go to that. The power of a positive no. What we're also seeing with some of the companies that are going through change and transformation and reorgs and whatnot is leaders have to be able to learn not only what to say yes to, because you've talked a lot about what to say yes to, but also how to say no to certain things that are not aligned with either the priorities or where the energy needs to be focused. And I think that Bill Urey's book on the power of positive no is a really good way to get clear on what's most important. So you can say no and subtract some of the things that are not advancing you forward. It's just not more about piling more on, and I think we get lost in that, or at least we forget that part of it. So
I agree. I think the whole concept of product portfolio management, for me, that's where you get to say no. And another good friend of mine that you know as well, Goran, he likes to say, okay, don't give me a choice that's choice one, fall off a cliff, choice two, hit by a bus. choice three, have a tree fall on my leg, right? You got to give me some good choices out of that, when we're looking at the investment. And, that those are all three things you would say no to. But if those are the only three things you have, it's like, oh my God, there's so much pressure to say yes to one of those. And it's like, really? You're going to drop a log on your foot because you have no other choice. But the point is, no means that you can go back and you can revise. And you say with your yes, what is acceptable. So I think when you frame that with your product managers and you say, hey, this is what yes looks like, so now you can understand why what you brought me is a no. Okay, because now I've showed you what yes looks like. And we worked a lot with this product owners concept. And we really like to tell those stories and say, okay, here's two similar products that we put 20 million into each one of them. Here's one that's a world beater and now is the recognized name of the product, like Kleenex, in the market. And here's one that's just a complete loser and never drilled a hole or drilled very few holes and parked up all the machines, right? So those are the kind of stories that you can show. This is the yes and this is a no. So now when you bring me the proposals and the investment requests, you understand what does a yes look like and what is a no.
Yeah. One last question.
And then you're not taking it personally. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes really good sense. Is there any favorite quote that you've clung on to for sort of your career that has served you well?
I gave you a couple of them. I mean, goldfish don't climb ladders. Um, I gave you the hit by a bus, run over by a train. That's a good one. I like one from Ronnie Layton, and Ronnie, he's a bit of a brawler there, and he was the CEO of Atlas Copco. Now he's the chairman of Epiroc. But he said, I'm not afraid to punch you in the face and challenge you, but I'll never stab you in the back. And I really like that, from a senior leadership, perspective. You don't expect that to come out of a CEO's mouth, but I think it's really good because it means that, he's willing to spar with you. He's willing to really, put in the rounds with you, but you don't have to feel like when you walk away that you don't have his support, because you do, right? So after you've boxed a little over the result and the way things are going forward, when you walk out of that room, he's got your back. And I really like that quote. So my friend Satish actually framed that quote on his wall when he started up his business, Groundhog, and he said, I love that quote, Jess. So you should share that with everybody that you meet. So I like that quote as well.
I think, given the pace in which we're operating and all the decisions we're having to make and the different opinions and perspectives on things and being able to disagree but also to be able to do it in above the line perspective it's a core competency, I think, that's going to be part of going forward. So I also like that. Yeah. Let's just be direct and then move forward. Yeah. Jess, this has been great. Have a good flight.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Yeah.
It was good seeing you. All right, that is a wrap for this episode. Hey, a big thank you goes out to Jess for sharing some ideas on what he sees going on out there in the macro level and kind of even at the global level and the change that's happening. And then how do we as leaders need to be able to respond and change how we're leading in response to all that change. We covered a variety of leadership topics, one of which was this concept of the power of a customer-centric leadership approach. How do we stay close to our clients, our customers, the markets, how they're shifting so that we can respond accordingly? We also talked about the need for agility in responding to all this change. We've got to get more agile. We've got to be able to pivot more quickly. We also talked about how storytelling can be not only just a communication approach, but actually can be a strategic advantage when you're trying to get your teams and organizations to move towards the unknown, kind of the uncertain, towards that common mission of where you're taking them as a leader. Jess shared some fantastic insights for emerging leaders in particular, and really stressed the importance that you don't have to have all the answers, and that curiosity is one of those most underutilized skill sets, because the team out there might have a better way to do things than what you know to be true. And so practice that openness, that curiosity, and release some of the control. I jotted down 5 key takeaways that I thought were most relevant, notable from our conversation. Number 1, agility and adaptability are becoming non-negotiables for leaders. So we've got to be able to loosen the grip and be able to be more adaptable. Number 2, curiosity fuels engagement, learning, and innovation. We already talked about that. Number 3, storytelling is really a great communication approach and can be a strong strategy as you're trying to get people aligned and moving in the same direction. Number 4, resilient teams that have grit and the ability to deal with conflict internally will always outperform those that are not resilient. We know that. And last, number 5, courageous authenticity does build trust and credibility, but yet it requires vulnerability and openness on our part. We've added some of the recommended leadership books that Jess mentioned during the show notes, so make sure you check those out. And if you've enjoyed today's podcast, make sure you go on your favorite podcast platform and follow us. And if you feel so inclined, it would be great to have you do a review or a rating, because that does help others find us on the podcast platforms. You know, leadership isn't easy, but yet it's one of the most rewarding challenges that we can take on. And the world needs good, strong leadership today, probably more than any time in the past. And so, as it always is, my challenge to all of you is to go out and lead with courage, with strength, lead with authenticity, realness, and of course, humility. Until next time, thanks for listening.